Yes, the common heritage of Sufism, Buddhism, and Taoism might seem like an improbable proposition to some of you on the face of it. Those traditions are so different from one another across time and imagery and doctrine. But one of the earliest Muslim philosophers, Al-Farabi, later known as Al-Farabius, in the Western world and studied by the Latin scholars, he said that all religions and traditions are at their source one, but they differ according to the imagination. Meant by that not only the human imagination of the person and the culture receiving that new tradition, but also the divine imagination. So according to those people, there is an imagination that the world of spirit has, and that the world of form is in fact the manifestation. So just an example of that from the Islamic tradition would be that that the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, had an ascension on a very interesting animal called the Buraq. And he ascended into the heavens and experienced different kinds of revelatory stages. Different levels, and exoterically it's of course assumed these are just fact. This happened as described, and people try to imagine what it would mean. Rumi gives us a little bit of insight and helps us to enter into the conversation that I would like to have with you tonight. And he says the ascension, by the way, is called the Miraj, the rising up. And Rumi says, what is the ascension? It is non-being. Return to non-being. And for the lovers, meaning the true lovers, the only religion, the only faith is non-being. In Persian it's chist miraj falak in nisti, ashiqan ra mazhabuddin nisti. So we realize already we've entered into unusual territory where love is being described as a disappearance. What we in the West might call the fertile void. And at this level that this early Muslim mystic, Al-Farabius, was was talking about, if we stay at the level of what is imagined, the details of religion, obviously it is hard to see what sort of common heritage these particular three religions might have. Although I'm happy to tell you that there is such a thing, and I'm going to be talking about it. Because it's hard to talk about the fertile void. It's hard to talk about silence and utter darkness. But at that level of oneness, I'm bringing you three or more statements from each of these traditions with which to open the talk. And we have Lao Tzu says, this is from Wen Tzu: they are virtuous who close their senses, put away their aspirations and intentions, cast off their intellectual brilliance, and return to a vastness where there is no conscious knowing. From Zhuangzi: the sage said, see nothing, hear nothing, guard your spirit in quietude, and your body will go right of its own accord. Be quiet, be pure, toil not your body, perturb not your vital essence, and you will live forever. Moving to Buddhism, Huineng, the sixth patriarch of Zen, says all things are not apart from our intrinsic nature. Who would have expected that our intrinsic nature is basically pure? Who would have expected that our intrinsic nature is basically unborn and unperishing? Who would have expected that our intrinsic nature is fundamentally complete in itself?
I think some of the most eminent physicists in the world. At that time, Europe was becoming extremely disturbed, and the refugees both from Germany and from Italy, were pouring through Blackett's department. And that was another great privilege of being in Manchester at that time. One met so many people, either in passage or they stayed for a long time and worked in Blackett. Now, on this weekend conference, I particularly remember Werner Heisenberg. Heisenberg, one of the great physicists in Germany, who then from Leipzig, well known for his uncertainty principle. And the whole of that weekend was occupied by the discussion of whether the conventional theory of high-energy electrons, high-energy particles was correct, or whether a new particle was involved. Yukawa, a Japanese theorist, had postulated that there was a heavy electron. I think it had about 180 times the mass of the normal electron, which we then called a mesotron. Well, for clarity, it soon became a meson, and there are now large numbers of mesons known in particle physics. But during that weekend conference, with Heisenberg believing completely in Yukawa's theory that we were studying not high-energy electrons, impacting on the lead plate or on the atmosphere with one of the heavy electrons that became the matter for dispute. And gradually during that weekend, I remember Blackett's view beginning to change. Before the end of the Sunday, he had been finally convinced by Heisenberg in particular and by the other physicists there that the theory was correct and that we were dealing with a new type of particle. That may sound very odd nowadays when there are hundreds and thousands of new particles, but one must remember that in those days we were dealing with the proton, also the negative electron, the neutron, which had just been discovered by Chadwick. And this was remarkable that we were adding to it a new particle which was about 180 times heavier than the electron.
Okay, let's try again.
The design is complete. But will it work? At this stage, a remotely located master computer takes over the job of calculating the performance curves of the circuit.
Very complicated. Music is simpler, and some of the methods which we're using here to describe music in terms of a graphical function can also be used for speech, and we can find out a great deal by studying these simpler sounds.
Advanced ideas in areas that are still unknown. Take stress. How do we always seem to know just which parts of spoken words to emphasize?
Let's try to synthesize that sentence.
Okay, do you want monotone pitch?
Let's hear it on monotone first.
Phonetic symbols are fed to the synthesizer. It combines them into intelligible speech.
I like glossy black.
A little bit stronger.
I like glossy black.
Communicating what we may discover. Things about how we sense the world around us.
On the other hand, let me hasten to add that that doesn't make us small. Or make the time that we have to us small. Because, again, looking at those pictures of what our minds are and some of the components of our minds, these beautiful drawings of the cellular patterns inside the brain, you see that there are many, many, many processing units. And if you analyze how fast they operate, I tried to estimate how many thoughts a person can have in a lifetime. That's kind of a fuzzy question, but I'm very proud that I was able to define it pretty precisely. And it turns out we have time for billions of meaningful thoughts
in a
lifetime. So it's a lot. We shouldn't think of ourselves as terribly small, either in space or in time, because although we're small in those dimensions compared to the universe, we're large compared to meaningful units of processing information and being able to conceptualize.
Yeah, but 99% of those thoughts are probably food, sex, or internet related. But yeah,
they're not. That's right.
only like 0.1 is Nobel Prize winning ideas.
That's true. But there's more to life than winning Nobel Prize.
How did you do that calculation? Can you maybe break that apart a little bit, just kind of for fun, sort of an intuition of how we calculate the number of thoughts?
It's necessarily imprecise because a lot of things are going on in different ways. What is a thought? But there are several things that point to more or less the same rate of being able to have meaningful thoughts. For instance, the one that I think is maybe the most penetrating is how fast we can process visual images. How do we do that? If you've ever watched old movies, you can see that when any movie, in fact, the motion picture is really not a motion picture. It's a series of snapshots that are played one after the other. And it's because our brains also work that way. We take snapshots of the world, integrate over a certain time, and then go on to the next one. And then by post-processing, create the illusion of continuity and flow. We can deal with that. And if the flicker rate is too slow, then you start to see that it's a series of snapshots. And you can ask, what is the crossover? When does it change from being something that is matched to our processing speed versus too fast? And it turns out about 40 per second. And then if you take 40 per second as how fast we can process visual images, you get to several billions of thoughts. If you ask what are some of the fastest things that people can do, well, they can play video games, they can play the piano very fast if they're skilled at it, and again you get to similar units. Or how fast can people talk? You get to simply, within a couple of orders of magnitude, you get more or less to the same idea. So that's how you can say that there's billions of there's room for billions of meaningful thoughts.
Yeah.
I won't argue for exactly 2 billion versus 1.8 billion. It's not that kind of question, but I think any estimate that's reasonable will come out within, say, 100 billion and 100 million.
first to be just amazed at computer characteristics. It's really a system of very simple graphs which project what's going to happen to the planet over the next 150 years if we don't do something drastic to stop it.
does exist in the solar system, it is most likely on Mars.
resource of the solar system, the gravity of one of its planets, to help it reach another planet.